Hello, Introduction to Sociology students. I hope you're having a good week. I want to talk to you in another mini lecture today about a topic that your textbook author addresses in the chapter on groups and organizations. And maybe groups and organizations doesn't sound like the most exciting chapter to you, but it really is at the core of what our modern day-to-day society seems to be like and about. Groups and organizations. So how can we make this exciting? Well, let's take a look at the phrase McDonaldization. And I want you to think about McDonaldization and ask yourselves if this is really what is happening to society. Or more pointedly, is this really what's happening to your life? So let's start out with McDonald's, and then we'll go to the idea of what McDonaldization means. First of all, I'd like to ask how many of you have ever been to a McDonald's? I'm going to bet that every hand in the house went up. And I might more pointedly or accurately ask, how many of you have been to McDonald's this week? Have any of you been to McDonald's today? I bet that somebody in our class has been. And that is an example of the success of McDonald's. And it's also an example of our real like for traditions. Although the traditions that we usually talk about in this class are cultural traditions like holidays, how to celebrate those, or rituals that families might have, it also, for better or for worse in our culture, is a tradition to have fast food. Most of us are pretty used to that. It fits into our lifestyles where we're very busy. Often we feel like we're too busy to cook. Whether we really are or not is debatable, but we certainly feel like we don't have the time to cook for ourselves. So, what is McDonaldization and how does it fit into sociology? Well, to begin with, we have to think of the cultural influence and spread of a day-to-day concept like fast food. For instance, John Machionis, the author of your textbook, notes that if you look at young children today, when young children are asked whether or not they recognize different individuals or symbols, we see that more young kids recognize Ronald McDonald, that cultural icon that is the face of McDonald's, than recognize George Washington, our first president. Is that a surprise to you? I bet it's really not. Intuitively, we know how important and how widespread these cultural symbols have become. So what does that mean for our society? Well, different people have different thoughts about it. And George Ritzer is a sociologist who in 1993 wrote a book about this idea of McDonaldization. He called it the McDonaldization of Society. Now, one really important thing to remember about this is that George Ritzer isn't really picking on McDonald's because the theory itself is not about McDonald's. It's about how the business and organizational principles behind McDonald's, which McDonald's has used quite successfully. Look at all those billions of hamburgers served. But McDonaldization looks at whether or not those very successful organizing and business principles are actually very similar to or even the same as principles that have come to guide our society. So it's not that McDonald's has made us that way. It's that these principles on which organizations like McDonald's just happens to be a great example of it, are actually founded and run. So what are these principles? Well, the first of them is efficiency. Have you ever noticed that when you pull up to that fast food restaurant, well, it's called fast food for a reason. Usually you order very quickly, and hopefully you expect to get that food very quickly too. So one of the questions is, do we as Americans, and do most people who live in Western nations, expect speed everywhere, out of everything. I don't know, I'll let you be the judge, but think about how impatient you may be when you're in that drive-through line and you don't get your food within 3 minutes. This is probably the first time in the history of human beings that anybody could get a complete meal prepared and cooked for them and bagged for them in less than 3 minutes. Yet, we probably start getting impatient when it's more than 2. So that first idea of McDonaldization is efficiency, and it's the idea that, well, if it's fast, it must be good. What could be bad about something that's fast? And has that spread beyond fast food restaurants? I think it definitely has. But I'd like you to kind of think in your mind some examples where it has, where we really believe that if it's fast, it must be good. So there's also, at places like McDonald's and other organizations that are run the same way, the idea of standardization. And standardization means that everything is weighed and measured to specifications, and those specifications are always the same. The hamburger is the same size. You don't go to McDonald's and unwrap it and say, gee, my burger is especially large today. Your burger on Monday is the same size as your burger on Tuesday, and the slice of cheese is the same width, and those French fries, no wonder. I mean, who can resist those French fries? They're the same size, the same little square if you measure them. Sometimes little pieces break off and things, but basically you're getting the same set of fries. And people come to expect that, and that's standardization. Then there's the idea of uniformity and predictability. If you go to a McDonald's in Boise, or a McDonald's in Atlanta, or a McDonald's in Miami, or a McDonald's right here in Fort Lauderdale where I live, you're going to find that the burger tastes exactly the same. You're probably not going to go to Boise and say, my burger tastes a little more smoky today, or what is that Chipotle flavoring in the French fries? No. And a lot of people love that. So do we like that in society as well? When something all of a sudden is different or out of the norm, how does that go over? Or do we have an expectation of McDonaldization in what we eat, drink, but also in the way we live our lives? Maybe in how our schools are set up. Is it the same way that the French fries are made in a mold where those French fries are supposed to come out the same? Or do we actually encourage differences in thinking outside of the box? I'll let you decide once again. And then finally, the last element of McDonaldization that Ritzer talks about is control through automation. And we know that there's a lot more technology out there, or I wouldn't be virtually speaking to you on the iPad today. McDonald's is another example of this. Once upon a time, long before most of you were born, when we rang something into a cash register, we pressed the individual buttons, $1.75. And McDonald's is different because some business manager somewhere realized that people, human beings, are far from perfect, and they make mistakes. They hand out the wrong change, less, more. They ring in the wrong item. They don't press 1.75, they press 17.5, and messes everything up on the register. So that brilliant manager put pictures on the McDonald's cash registers instead of numbers. So all the employee has to do, check it out the next time you're at a McDonald's, is press a picture, and up it comes, supposedly eliminating a lot of human error. And what about this? In some ways it's much easier, and it probably does stop a measure of human error. Does it take some challenge out? Does it change things? And do we do that in society as well? Do we make something so simple that we almost forget we're doing it? Now, the flip side of this, of course, is that technology and automation can help us. Without it, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. You wouldn't be seeing my face. We wouldn't be doing a face-to-face kind of a lecture. We wouldn't have an online class at all. So you have to think about the different realms of society and how technology has infiltrated them and what the results have actually been. Now, as I said, although all of these examples went back to the restaurant chain McDonald's, and those are everywhere, 33,000 and counting throughout the world. One of this week's top Google News stories was that McDonald's is opening up some all-vegetarian restaurants in India. So think about how something like that might contrast with the idea of McDonaldization. Because of globalization, McDonald's wants to spread, but they've had limited markets in some areas where their foods don't match cultural expectations or requirements. So in some ways, society is changing McDonald's. Is that a statement against McDonaldization at the larger level? But again, a reminder that this whole idea is not just about McDonald's, because we have a lot of automated things that are out there in society that are not McDonald's. For example, ATMs. We don't go to a cashier anymore to hand us money. The machine just spits it out. And it wasn't so many years ago when ATMs didn't exist. I remember that time. Maybe some of you do too, but I bet most of you do not. You've grown up only in a world with ATMs. Most of you, though, have seen the change that's in progress right now with automated checkouts at the stores. That's kind of interesting. In one way, a lot of times those automatic checkout lanes are empty, so it's the fast way to go through. Sometimes they're empty because people have a lot of technological problems when they use them, and they always have to press the button and call for help anyway, so some people avoid them. But they beg a lot of questions. Is that the way you want to leave the grocery store? Or do you miss actually talking to someone at the checkout? Do you miss that interchange, the actual social interaction that you had with them, like symbolic interaction theory might suggest? And it also kind of brings up the question of what happened to those people? What happened to those jobs, the people that used to ring up your groceries? Are they working somewhere else in the grocery store, or have they been displaced by technology, by a machine? So at what price is more convenience and more streamlining? This brings up a lot of questions about society. So I want you to think about McDonaldization. I want you to think the next time you're in line for fast food at any restaurant, or the next time you sit down to have a slow, home-cooked meal, whenever that might be. Max Weber, a sociologist, thought a lot about this, because many of these aspects of organizing, groups and businesses are very rational. I mean, it makes sense. All of this is very streamlined. It gets you your food faster. It makes it standardized. It makes it efficient. But Weber, long before the first McDonald's restaurant was even built, worried about efficiency. He worried about efficiency getting over-efficient, too efficient, if you will. He worried that bureaucracies would turn into large mazes, and he thought they might kind of use the image of an iron cage. He thought they might entrap us in an iron cage of our own making, if you will. That's a pretty dramatic image. So you may think the next time you go for fast food, it's the big deal, it's just a hamburger. But I want you to just stop for a moment and consider, have our ideas about things like fast food or fast coffee infiltrated our very society? And how have they? Have they actually improved it? Have they changed it? Or are we losing something in the process? I'll see you next time. Bye.